The champagne glass trembled in my hand as I stood at the edge of the hotel ballroom, watching the intelligence community's elite celebrate another year of classified victories. Crystal chandeliers cast shadows across faces I recognized from briefings I was never invited to attend. The annual Directors' Gala was invitation only, and mine had come with a very specific purpose that no one else in the room knew about. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I smoothed down my black cocktail dress, the same one I'd worn to job interviews that led nowhere, to networking events where conversations died the moment I mentioned my last name. Chen. In this room, that name carried weight, but not the kind that opened doors for me. Dr. Harrison Chen stood near the podium, silver-haired and commanding, accepting congratulations from senators and agency heads who hung on his every word. My father, the legendary intelligence analyst who'd predicted 3 major international crises and prevented a nuclear incident in 2019. The man who'd built a career on seeing patterns others missed. The same man who'd called me a dropout when I left Georgetown halfway through my political science degree. Who'd refused to speak to me for 2 years when I took a job as a data entry clerk for a private security firm instead of finishing my education. Who'd told me I was wasting the Chen legacy on mediocrity and that I'd never amount to anything in the intelligence world without proper credentials. I hadn't spoken to him in 8 months, not since the last Christmas dinner where he'd introduced me to his colleagues as my daughter who's still finding herself, while my stepbrother Marcus got a 10-minute speech about his recent promotion at the State Department. Marcus, who'd graduated summa cum laude and spoke 4 languages fluently, who'd never met a networking opportunity he couldn't leverage, the golden child who made sense. Tonight felt different, though. The weight in my purse wasn't just my phone and keys. It was a flash drive containing something that would change everything if I had the courage to use it. 3 weeks ago, my life had been the same predictable routine of database management and weekend solitude. Then, a woman named Dr. Sarah Martinez had walked into my life, and everything shifted. The morning Sarah Martinez first contacted me, I was sitting in my studio apartment in Arlington, surrounded by empty coffee cups and printouts from my day job at Morrison Analytics. The work was mind-numbing, organizing contractor databases for government agencies, but it paid the bills and kept me invisible. Invisible was safe. Invisible meant no one expected anything from me. Her email was simple and direct. Ms. Chen, I believe we should meet. I have information about your work that might interest you. Coffee tomorrow, 2 p.m., Grind Coffee on Wilson Boulevard. Come alone. I almost deleted it. Spam emails were common in my line of work, and mysterious meeting requests usually led to pyramid schemes or worse. But something about the tone made me hesitate. Professional, but not corporate. Urgent, but not desperate. I Googled her name and found nothing concrete, just a few academic citations and a LinkedIn profile that listed her as an independent intelligence consultant. The photo showed a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and graying temples, someone who looked like she'd spent years keeping secrets. Against my better judgment, I went. Grind Coffee was exactly the kind of place you'd choose for, a conversation you didn't want overheard, loud enough to mask voices, busy enough that 2 women talking wouldn't draw attention. Sarah was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with her back to the wall and a clear view of both entrances. Old habits, I assumed. She was smaller than her photo suggested, but her presence filled the space around her. When she smiled, it didn't reach her eyes. Those stayed calculating, measuring me in ways that made my skin crawl with familiarity. I'd seen that look before, in my father's study when he was analyzing intelligence reports. "Victoria Chen," she said, not a question. "Thank you for coming." I slid into the booth across from her, noting how she'd positioned herself strategically. "You know who I am, but I don't know anything about you." That puts me at a disadvantage. Disadvantage is relative. She signaled the waitress for coffee refills. Tell me, what do you know about Operation Crimson Web? The name hit me like cold water. I'd heard it whispered in my father's phone. Calls, seen it in documents that disappeared from his home office before I could read them properly. I know it's classified, and that you shouldn't be asking me about it. Your father never told you about your role in it? My role? I laughed, but it came out bitter. My father thinks I'm a failed college student who couldn't handle real academic work. What role could I possibly have in anything important? Sarah pulled out a manila folder and slid it across the table. Inside were photographs, documents, and what looked like personnel files. My name was on several of them, but not the way I expected. Instead of Victoria Chen, Dropout, the files listed me as V. Chen, Intelligence Analyst, Level 7 Clearance, Operation Crimson Web Asset 047. This is impossible, I whispered, staring at an authorization form bearing my digital signature. I never signed anything like this. I don't have security clearance. You do now. Sarah's voice was matter of fact. You've had it for 2 years. Your work at Morrison Analytics isn't data entry, Victoria. You've been analyzing terror financing networks and identifying shell companies for money laundering operations. Every database you've organized, every pattern you've found, it's all been feeding into Crimson Web. My hands shook as I flipped through more documents. Financial tracking reports with my initials in the corner. Threat assessment summaries that matched patterns I'd noticed in my supposedly mundane spreadsheets. Connection maps that looked exactly like the organizational charts I'd been building for what I thought were corporate compliance reviews. Someone's been using my work without telling me. The words came out flat, emotionless. My father knew about this. Your father designed it. Sarah leaned forward. Harrison Chen created a program to identify natural intelligence analysts, people who could spot patterns and connections without traditional training. People who wouldn't be suspected because they didn't fit the typical profile. You were his first success story. The coffee shop noise faded into background static. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my failures, my relationship with my father, was rearranging itself into a picture I couldn't quite process. He let me think. I was a disappointment for years.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Financial records that showed money flowing from Crimson Web accounts into a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. Communication logs that revealed someone had been feeding operational details to a contact in Eastern Europe. Most damning of all, a personnel file that showed someone with high-level access had been systematically undermining my father's operations for the past 18 months. The device beeped softly, indicating the download was complete. I pocketed it quickly and began moving the boxes back into position. That's when I heard voices in the hallway, closer this time, and one of them was familiar. The hearing tomorrow is just a formality, Marcus was saying. Chen's finished. The committee already has their minds made up. My stepbrother's voice was unmistakable, even through the supply closet door. He was talking to someone whose response I couldn't quite make out, but Marcus's next words made my blood freeze. The beauty of it is that everyone thinks Harrison's been protecting some imaginary asset. They have no idea his precious daughter has been feeding us intelligence for 2 years without knowing it. When Crimson Web gets shut down tomorrow, all those financial irregularities will die with it. The other voice responded with something that made Marcus laugh, a sound I'd heard 1,000 times at family dinners, but never with this particular edge of malice. Victoria thinks she's a failure, and Harrison thinks he's been keeping her safe. Neither of them realizes she's been the perfect cover for moving money out of classified operations. Every database she's cleaned, every pattern she's identified, it's all been cover for the real operation. I pressed my ear closer to the door, trying to catch the other person's words, but their voice was too low. Marcus continued with the casual cruelty of someone discussing the weather. Tomorrow, when they recommend Harrison's removal, I'll be positioned to take over the intelligence analysis division. Clean slate, new protocols, no more sentimental attachments to failed experiments. The Chen legacy dies with the old man. Their footsteps began moving away, but I caught one last exchange that made my hands clench into fists. "What about Victoria?" the other voice asked. "What about her? She'll go back to being a dropout with daddy issues. Where she belongs." I waited until their voices faded completely before emerging from the supply closet. My legs felt unsteady, and I had to lean against the wall for a moment to process what I'd just heard. Marcus wasn't just involved in the scheme to destroy my father's career. He was leading it. And he'd been using my work, my genuine analytical insights, as cover for financial crimes that would fund whatever he was really doing. The elevator ride back down to the records division felt like descending into a different reality. Morrison barely looked up when I returned his badge, and I managed to leave the building without anyone asking questions about my business there. But as I walked to my car, every face I passed seemed suspicious. Every glance felt loaded with meaning. Sarah was waiting for me at a diner 20 minutes away, sitting in a corner booth with her laptop open and her attention focused on the data streaming across the screen. She looked up when I slid into the seat across from her, and whatever she saw in my expression made her close the laptop immediately. "What happened?" I pulled out the device she'd given me and set it on the table between us. "I got what you needed, but there's more. My stepbrother Marcus is running the operation to destroy my father. He's been using my work to cover up financial crimes, and tomorrow's hearing is designed to eliminate any chance of discovery." Sarah's expression went through several changes before settling on grim satisfaction. "That explains the inconsistencies I've been tracking. Marcus Chen has been promoted 3 times in 2 years, each time coinciding with successful Crimson Web operations that your analysis made possible." She plugged the device into her laptop and began transferring files. "The data you just copied will show us exactly how he's been manipulating the financial records. But we need more than evidence of embezzlement. We need proof that he's been selling intelligence to foreign agents. How do we get that?" "We don't." Sarah's smile was sharp as winter wind. "You do. Tomorrow's hearing isn't just about your father's career. It's about the future of Crimson Web and everyone who's been working on it, including you." She turned the laptop screen toward me, showing a photograph I'd never seen before. It was me, taken with a telephoto lens, entering the Morrison Analytics building 3 months ago. Below it was a detailed psychological profile that described my analytical capabilities with clinical precision. "Marcus has been building a case that you're an unstable security risk, someone who inherited your father's paranoid tendencies without his professional judgment. He's planning to use your presence at tomorrow's hearing as evidence that Chen has lost perspective, that he's so desperate to validate his daughter that he'd compromise operational security." I stared at my own face on the screen, reading words that painted me as delusional and potentially dangerous. "So if I show up tomorrow, I'm proving his point. If you show up unprepared, yes. But if you show up with evidence that Marcus has been the real security breach all along, that he's been using his position to sell Crimson Web intelligence while hiding behind your unwitting analysis work." Sarah's voice trailed off, letting me draw my own conclusions. The diner felt smaller suddenly, the fluorescent lights too bright, and the smell of coffee too strong. Everything I thought I knew about my family, my work, my purpose, had been turned inside out in the space of a few hours. My father hadn't been protecting me from failure. He'd been protecting me from my stepbrother's ambition. "There's one more thing," Sarah said, pulling up another file. "Marcus isn't working alone. The committee member who's been pushing hardest for your father's removal, Congressman Bradley, has been receiving payments from the same shell company that's been laundering Crimson Web funds." She showed me bank records that traced a clear path from operational accounts through Marcus's dummy corporations to Bradley's personal finances. They've been planning this for months. Destroy Harrison Chen's credibility, take control of his operations, and use the intelligence apparatus for personal profit. I thought about all the family gatherings where Marcus had seemed so supportive, so concerned about my future and my relationship with our father. Every concerned conversation, every helpful suggestion, every moment of apparent brotherly care had been performance designed to position himself as the stable, reliable son, while I remained the disappointing daughter. What do you need me to do? Sarah's expression grew serious. I need you to walk into that hearing tomorrow and show them exactly what Victoria Chen is capable of. Not as your father's daughter, not as Marcus's stepsister, but as the intelligence analyst who's been protecting this country without even knowing it. She handed me a thick folder filled with documents, photographs, and financial records. Everything you need is in here. But Victoria, once you walk into that room and present this evidence, there's no going back. Marcus will know you've discovered his operation. Bradley will know his corruption has been exposed. Your father will know the truth about what you've been doing all along. I took the folder, feeling its weight both literally and figuratively. And if I don't go? Then tomorrow your father's career ends in disgrace. He let everyone think that. It was cover. The deeper you believed you were failing, the more authentic your civilian identity became. No one looks twice at a college dropout working data entry. Meanwhile, you were dismantling terrorist funding, operations, and tracking international arms dealers. I thought about all the times I'd caught mistakes in the databases, noticed inconsistencies that didn't make sense, created organizational charts that revealed patterns no one had asked me to find. My supervisors at Morrison had always seemed pleased with my work, but they'd never explained why my reports were so important or where they went after I submitted them. How long have you known? I asked. 6 months. I've been investigating irregularities in Crimson Web's operational structure. Money going to unauthorized accounts, intelligence being leaked to foreign agents, assets being compromised. Someone inside the operation is selling information, and they've been using your analytical work to cover their tracks. The folder felt heavier in my hands. And you think my father is involved? I think your father is in danger. The same person who's been using your work to hide their crimes has been positioning themselves to take over Crimson Web completely. They've convinced the Oversight Committee that Harrison Chen has become a security risk, that his methods are outdated and his judgment compromised. Sarah pulled out her phone and showed me a news article dated 3 days ago. CIA veteran under investigation for operational security breaches. The photo showed my father leaving a congressional hearing, his face drawn and exhausted in a way I'd never seen before. The hearing is tomorrow. They're going to recommend his removal and the dissolution of Crimson Web, unless someone can prove that he's been protecting a valuable asset all along, and that the real security breach is coming from inside the Oversight Committee itself. I stared at the documents spread across the table, at my name on forms I'd never seen, at evidence of work I'd done without knowing its true purpose. What do you want from me? I want you to walk into that hearing tomorrow and show them exactly what Victoria Chen is capable of. Not as a dropout or a disappointment, but as the intelligence analyst you've been all along. The weight of the flash drive in my purse felt heavier as Sarah's words echoed in my mind. There's more, she'd said as we'd parted ways. Documents that prove who's been selling Crimson Web intelligence, but you'll need to get them yourself, from inside the CIA building. That night, I'd sat in my apartment reading through everything Sarah had given me, trying to reconcile the person I thought I was with the analyst I'd apparently been. Every database I'd cleaned, every pattern I'd identified, every inconsistency I'd flagged had been feeding into operations that saved lives and disrupted criminal networks. I hadn't been failing at anything. I'd been succeeding at something I didn't even know I was doing. The irony was almost too perfect. My father, the man who'd made a career of seeing hidden connections, had hidden my own capabilities from me so thoroughly that I'd believed I was worthless. And now, standing in this ballroom full of people who saw me as nothing more than Harrison Chen's disappointing daughter, I was carrying proof that could either save his career or destroy it completely. The CIA building at Langley looked different when you had a purpose beyond tourist curiosity. The limestone facade that had always seemed imposing now felt like a fortress I needed to breach. Sarah had gotten me a temporary visitor's pass under the pretense of delivering archived documents to the Records Management Division, but we both knew I'd be going far beyond the public areas. My hands were steady as I badged through the first security checkpoint, but my heart hammered against my ribs. The guard barely glanced at my ID before waving me through the metal detector. Just another contractor with paperwork to deliver, nothing worth a second look. That invisibility I'd grown to hate was finally working in my favor. The corridors stretched endlessly, all beige walls and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill. I followed the signs toward records management, but my real destination was 3 floors up in the operational analysis wing. Sarah had memorized the building layout for me, complete with camera blind spots and shift change schedules. Getting to the 7th floor would require an access card I didn't have, but she'd provided a solution for that too. James Morrison sat behind the records desk looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Mid-50s, thinning hair, the kind of bureaucratic fatigue that came from 20 years of filing other people's secrets. He looked up when I approached, his expression shifting from boredom to mild interest when he saw the folder in my hands. "Delivery for the Operational Analysis Division," I said, keeping my voice professional but friendly. "Archives from the 2019 Syria Assessment Project." He reached for the folder, but I pulled it back slightly. "Actually, I need to deliver this personally to Dr. Richardson in 7B. Chain of custody protocols, you know how it is." Morrison's face went through several expressions before settling on resigned annoyance. "Richardson's in hearings all week. You can leave it with me." I wish I could, but my supervisor was very specific. Personal delivery only. I gave him what I hoped was an apologetic smile. "Would you mind if I used your badge to get up there? I'll be 5 minutes tops." He studied me for a long moment, and I could see him weighing the bureaucratic cost of helping versus the bureaucratic cost of dealing with angry supervisors later. Apparently, angry supervisors won. "Fine, but make it quick." He unclipped his badge and handed it over. "7th floor, turn right off the elevator. Richardson's office is the 3rd door." I thanked him and headed for the elevators, my borrowed badge feeling like a brick in my pocket. The ride to the 7th floor took forever, each floor ding, echoing in the small space like a countdown timer. When the doors finally opened, I stepped into a different world. This wasn't the sterile government building atmosphere of the lower floors. Here, the walls were lined with monitors displaying data streams I couldn't interpret, and the few people I saw moved with the focused urgency of people working on problems that mattered. The air itself felt charged with importance. Richardson's office was exactly where Morrison had said it would be, but I wasn't looking for Richardson. 3 doors down was a supply closet that Sarah had identified as having an access panel to the building's network infrastructure. She'd given me a small device that would clone the security protocols I needed, but first I had to get inside. The hallway was empty, but voices carried from nearby offices. I could hear someone on a phone call discussing satellite imagery, another person typing rapidly while muttering about funding discrepancies. Normal workday sounds that provided perfect cover for what I was about to do. The supply closet was locked, but Sarah had anticipated that too. The lockpick set she'd given me was disguised as a pen, and she'd spent an hour teaching me the basics in her hotel room. My hands shook slightly as I worked, but the lock was standard government issue, designed more for deterrence than serious security. The door clicked open just as footsteps approached from around the corner. I slipped inside and closed the door behind me, holding my breath as the footsteps passed without slowing. The closet was cramped and dark, filled with boxes of printer paper and office supplies that smelled faintly of toner and dust. The access panel was behind a stack of boxes that I had to move carefully to avoid noise. When I finally exposed it, the panel looked exactly like Sarah had described. I plugged in her device and watched as it began copying security protocols, progress bar crawling across the tiny screen. While I waited, I thought about the documents Sarah had shown me. Crimson Web gets disbanded. Marcus takes over intelligence analysis for the CIA, and everyone who's been working to protect this country under your father's programs becomes vulnerable to whatever Marcus is really planning. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. I'd spent years believing I was a disappointment, but I'd actually been serving my country in ways I'd never imagined. Tomorrow, I'd find out whether that service meant anything to the people who'd been benefiting from it all along. The Hart Senate office building felt like a courthouse where verdicts had already been decided. Marble columns stretched toward vaulted ceilings that seemed designed to make individuals feel insignificant, and every footstep echoed with the weight of institutional authority. I clutched Sarah's folder against my chest as I navigated the maze of corridors toward room 216, where the Intelligence Oversight Committee was preparing to end my father's career. Security was lighter than I'd expected, just a single checkpoint where they scanned IDs and checked names against a list. The guard barely glanced at me when I showed him the visitor's pass Sarah had arranged, listing me as a potential witness for the Chen investigation. He waved me through with the bored efficiency of someone who'd processed hundreds of similar requests. The hearing room was smaller than I'd imagined from watching congressional proceedings on television. 3 tiers of seats faced a long table, where 5 committee members sat with stacks of documents and serious expressions. Behind them, flags and official seals created a backdrop of institutional gravitas that was clearly designed to intimidate. My father sat at a smaller table facing the committee, his shoulders straight but somehow diminished. He wore his best suit, the navy one he'd worn to my high school graduation and every important occasion since. His hair had more gray than I remembered, and when he turned slightly to scan the gallery, I saw lines around his eyes that hadn't been there the last time we'd spoken. Marcus sat in the front row of the gallery section, positioned where he could see everything and be seen by everyone who mattered. He looked confident, relaxed even, like someone watching a movie where he already knew the ending. When his eyes found me in the back row, his expression flickered with surprise before settling into something that might have been amusement. Congressman Bradley called the session to order with a gaveling that seemed unnecessarily forceful. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 50, with the kind of polished appearance that came from professional image consulting. When he spoke, his voice carried the practiced authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. This committee reconvenes to conclude our investigation into operational irregularities within the Crimson Web intelligence program. Dr. Harrison Chen, you've had the opportunity to review the evidence presented against you. Do you wish to make any additional statements before we proceed to our final deliberations? My father stood slowly, his hands resting on the table in front of him. Congressman Bradley, members of the committee, I've served this country for 32 years. I've never compromised an operation, never endangered an asset, and never placed personal interests above national security. The allegations against me are based on misinterpreted data and deliberate mischaracterizations of legitimate operational protocols. His voice was steady, but I could hear the fatigue underneath. This wasn't just a professional hearing for him. It was a personal dismantling of everything he'd built, and he knew it. Bradley shuffled through his papers with theatrical precision. Dr. Chen, the evidence shows that you've created unauthorized intelligence positions, diverted operational funds without proper oversight, and compromised security protocols by involving uncleared personnel in classified operations. Specifically, we have documentation showing that you've been using your daughter, Victoria Chen, as an unofficial analyst, despite her lack of security clearance or proper vetting. I felt my stomach drop as Bradley continued. Ms. Chen has no formal intelligence training, no educational credentials in relevant fields, and a history of academic failure that raises questions about her judgment and reliability. Using her as an intelligence asset represents a profound breach of operational security. My father's voice sharpened. Victoria Chen has never been involved in classified operations. Any suggestion otherwise is completely unfounded. Is it? Bradley smiled with the confidence of someone holding winning cards. We have documentation showing that Morrison Analytics, where your daughter works, has been processing data directly related to Crimson Web operations. We have evidence that financial irregularities in the program coincide exactly with periods when she was handling sensitive databases. I watched my father's face change as he began to understand the trap that had been laid for him. They weren't just accusing him of operational incompetence. They were accusing him of using me as an unwitting accomplice in whatever crimes they believed he'd committed. Marcus stood up from his seat in the gallery. Congressman Bradley, if I may address the committee? Bradley nodded approvingly. The committee recognizes Mr. Marcus Chen, senior analyst with the State Department, and Dr. Chen's stepson. Marcus moved to a microphone with the smooth confidence of someone who'd rehearsed this moment. Thank you, Congressman. I want to be clear that I have tremendous respect for my stepfather's service record, but I've watched with growing concern as his judgment has become increasingly compromised by his relationship with my stepsister. He glanced back at me, his expression perfectly calibrated to convey reluctant sadness. Victoria has struggled with feelings of inadequacy her entire adult life. She dropped out of college, has had difficulty maintaining stable employment, and has developed what I believe to be an unhealthy fixation on proving herself worthy of our father's approval. I felt heat rising in my cheeks as Marcus continued his character assassination. I believe Harrison has been so desperate to help Victoria feel valuable that he's created an elaborate fiction where her basic data entry work has important intelligence applications. The financial irregularities in Crimson Web aren't evidence of corruption. They're evidence of a father trying to manufacture significance for his daughter's mundane job. The committee members were nodding along with Marcus's explanation, their expressions shifting from suspicion to something that looked almost like sympathy. He was giving them a narrative that made sense, that transformed a complex conspiracy into a simple story of paternal love gone wrong. That's when I stood up. Every head in the room turned toward me as I moved from my seat in the back row toward the witness area. The folder Sarah had given me felt like armor in my hands, and for the first time in years, I felt completely certain about what I was doing. Congressman Bradley, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the small room, I'd like to present evidence to this committee. Bradley's expression shifted from surprise to annoyance. Ms. Chen, you're not scheduled to testify, and you don't have clearance to discuss classified materials. Actually, I do. I pulled out the security credentials Sarah had discovered in my files. I've had Level 7 clearance for 2 years, authorized under Crimson Web operational protocols, and I have evidence that directly contradicts everything. My stepbrother just told you. The room went completely silent. I could see Marcus's confident expression cracking as he realized his careful script was about to be destroyed. My father was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between shock and recognition. I approached the witness table and set down the folder, opening it to reveal the first document. Congressman Bradley, you stated that the financial irregularities in Crimson Web coincide with my involvement in data processing. That's correct, but not for the reasons you've been told. I pulled out a financial tracking report that showed money flowing from Crimson Web accounts into shell companies. These irregularities represent approximately $3 million in diverted funds over 18 months. The money was moved through a series of offshore accounts controlled by Phoenix Holdings, LLC, a company registered in the Cayman Islands. Bradley leaned forward, his composure beginning to slip. Ms. Chen, how could you possibly have access to that information? Because I traced it myself. It's what I do. I turned to face the committee directly. For 2 years, I've been analyzing financial networks and identifying patterns in money laundering operations. Every database I've organized for Morrison, analytics has been feeding intelligence to Crimson Web operations that have disrupted terrorism financing and international arms trafficking. I pulled out photographs of Marcus entering buildings I recognized from surveillance reports, time-stamped, with dates that corresponded to major intelligence leaks. The person who's been selling Crimson Web intelligence to foreign agents isn't my father. It's Marcus Chen. Marcus shot to his feet. This is ridiculous. She's obviously unstable, making desperate accusations to protect her father. Am I? I turned to face him directly, and for the first time in our relationship, I saw fear in his eyes. Then explain why Phoenix Holdings LLC lists you as a financial consultant. Explain why you've received payments totaling $800,000 from accounts connected to Eastern European intelligence services. I spread financial records across the witness table like playing cards. Explain why every major security breach in Crimson Web operations has occurred within 48 hours of you accessing classified files through your State Department credentials. The committee members were passing documents back and forth, their expressions shifting from confusion to alarm as they processed what they were seeing. Bradley had gone pale, his earlier confidence evaporating as he realized the scope of what was being revealed. Furthermore, I continued, pulling out communication logs, I have recorded conversations between Marcus Chen and Congressman Bradley, discussing their plan to frame my father for financial crimes while taking control of intelligence analysis operations for their own purposes. Bradley stood up abruptly. This committee does not recognize these alleged recordings, and we question the authenticity of documents presented by someone with obvious personal motivations to fabricate evidence. That's when the back doors of the hearing room opened and Director Patricia Walsh of the CIA walked in with 2 security officers. The room went completely silent as she approached the committee table, her presence commanding attention in a way that reduced everyone else to supporting players. Congressman Bradley, she said, her voice cutting through the silence like steel. I'm here to inform you that the Central Intelligence Agency has been conducting a parallel investigation into the allegations against Dr. Harrison Chen. She gestured toward me. Victoria Chen has been a classified asset of the United States intelligence community for 2 years. Her analytical work has contributed to operations that have prevented 3 terrorist attacks, disrupted multiple international money laundering networks, and identified foreign intelligence operatives working within our own government. Director Walsh pulled out her own folder and placed it on the committee table. The evidence she's presented today corroborates our findings that Marcus Chen has been operating as a foreign agent, using his access to classified information to compromise ongoing operations while enriching himself through the sale of intelligence to hostile governments. She turned to look directly at Bradley. We also have evidence that Congressman Bradley has been receiving payments from the same sources, and that this hearing was designed not to investigate corruption within Crimson Web, but to eliminate the people who were getting too close to discovering the real conspiracy. The security officers moved toward Marcus, who had gone completely white. Marcus Chen, you're under arrest for espionage, money laundering, and conspiracy against the United States government. As they led him away in handcuffs, Director Walsh turned to face me. Ms. Chen, would you please remain after this hearing? We have a great deal to discuss about your future with the agency. She paused, then looked directly at my father. Dr. Chen, the Crimson Web program is not being terminated. It's being expanded, and we'd like you to continue leading it. My father stood slowly, his eyes never leaving my face. For the first time in years, when he looked at me, I saw pride instead of disappointment. Not because I'd proven myself worthy of his approval, but because I'd proven I'd never needed it in the first place. The hearing room was chaos as reporters rushed to process what they'd witnessed, and committee members tried to distance themselves from Bradley's corruption. But in that moment, all I could focus on was my father walking toward me with tears in his eyes and something that looked like wonder in his expression. "Victoria," he said quietly, "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you what you were really doing. But I've never been more proud of who you've become." I thought about all the years I'd spent believing I was a disappointment, all the family dinners where I'd felt like an outsider, all the times I'd wondered if I'd ever amount to anything meaningful. None of that mattered now, because I finally understood the truth. I'd never been a dropout. I'd been undercover all along. 6 months later, I sat in an office that still felt surreal. The nameplate on my desk read, Victoria Chen, Senior Intelligence, Analyst, Crimson Web Operations. And every morning when I saw it, I had to remind myself that this wasn't an elaborate dream. The office had a window that looked out over the Potomac, and walls lined with secure monitors that displayed data streams from around the world. My father knocked on the doorframe before entering, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the kind of smile I'd rarely seen from him growing up. Our relationship had changed fundamentally since the hearing, not because either of us was different, but because we finally understood who we'd always been to each other. "Morning briefing in 10 minutes, he said, setting one of the cups on my desk. "Anything urgent from the overnight analysts?" I gestured toward the main monitor, where a financial tracking algorithm I'd designed was highlighting suspicious transactions across 3 continents. "The Belgrade network is moving money again. Same pattern as last month, but they're routing through Singapore this time instead of Dubai." He leaned over my shoulder to study the data, and I could see him making the same connections I'd already identified. The ability to see patterns wasn't something I'd inherited from him, I'd realized. It was something we shared, a way of processing information that had made us both valuable to the intelligence community in our own ways. "Recommendation?" he asked. "We let it run for another 48 hours. If we interrupt now, we only catch the small fish. But if we track the full cycle, we can map their entire European network." I pulled up a projection showing how the money would likely flow based on previous patterns. By Thursday, we should have enough data to roll up the whole operation. My father nodded approvingly. "Brief the task force this afternoon." "Good. Work." As he left for the morning briefing, I turned back to my monitors and thought about how dramatically my life had changed. Not just the job title or the security clearance, but the fundamental understanding of my own capabilities. For years, I'd believed I was failing at everything I touched. Now I realized I'd been succeeding at something far more important than I'd ever imagined. The phone on my desk buzzed with an encrypted call. Sarah Martinez's voice came through clearly, despite the secure connection adding its usual electronic distortion. "Victoria, I need you to look at something. Sending it through secure channels now." A file appeared on my workstation, and when I opened it, I saw financial records that made my stomach drop. The transactions looked familiar, following patterns I'd seen before, but the source accounts were new. Someone was rebuilding the network that Marcus and Bradley had been using, and they were being much more careful about covering their tracks. "How long has this been active?" I asked. 3 weeks, maybe 4. We only caught it because one of their shell companies made a mistake with a timestamp. But Victoria, look at the authorization codes." I scrolled through the data until I found what she was referring to. The codes were formatted exactly like the ones Marcus had used, suggesting that whoever was running this new operation had access to his old protocols. That should have been impossible, since all of Marcus's access had been revoked and his methods had been thoroughly documented and closed. "Someone had a backup plan," I said, already beginning to trace the transaction patterns. Or Marcus wasn't working alone. That's what I'm afraid of. Can you run this through your pattern analysis software? See if we can identify who's picking up where Marcus left off? I was already loading the data into the tracking algorithm, watching as it began identifying connections and building relationship maps. "Give me an hour. I'll send you everything I find." After Sarah hung up, I stared at the data flowing across my screens and felt a familiar chill. The hearing 6 months ago had felt like an ending, a resolution that tied up all the loose threads of a conspiracy that had threatened both my father's career and national security. But intelligence work wasn't like a movie where all the bad guys got arrested and the credits rolled. It was an ongoing chess game where your opponents kept playing even after you thought you'd won. The algorithm completed its analysis faster than I'd expected, and the results were both illuminating and disturbing. The new operation wasn't just similar to Marcus's network. It was using the exact same infrastructure, the same offshore accounts, and many of the same contact protocols. Whoever was running it had intimate knowledge of how Marcus had operated, suggesting they'd either been his partner all along or had access to detailed information about his methods. More troubling, the timing of the transactions suggested that this new operation had been activated almost immediately after Marcus's arrest. Someone had been waiting for him to be neutralized so they could take over his network without interference. I was deep in analysis when my office door opened without a knock. Director Walsh walked in, her expression serious in a way that immediately put me on alert. She closed the door behind her and activated the privacy screen that would prevent any electronic surveillance of our conversation. "Victoria, we need to talk. There's been a development in the Marcus Chen case that affects you directly." I saved my work and turned to give her my full attention. "What kind of development?" "Marcus escaped federal custody this morning during a prison transport. 3 guards were injured, and we have reason to believe he had inside help." She pulled out a tablet and showed me surveillance footage of the attack. The operation was too sophisticated and too well-timed to be opportunistic. Someone has been planning this for months. The footage showed a coordinated assault on the prison van, with attackers who moved with military precision and had detailed knowledge of the transport route and security protocols. This wasn't a desperate escape attempt. It was a professional extraction. "There's more," Director Walsh continued. "We intercepted communications suggesting that Marcus is planning retaliation against the people responsible for his arrest. Your name was specifically mentioned, along with your father's and Sarah Martinez's." I felt my mouth go dry. "He's coming after us." "We don't know his exact plans, but we're taking the threat seriously. You're being assigned a protective detail, and we're implementing enhanced security protocols for your father and anyone else involved in the original investigation." She paused, studying my expression carefully. "Victoria, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. During your investigation of Marcus's activities, did you uncover any information that you didn't share with us? Any contacts, locations, or methods that he might use if he was planning to disappear?" I thought back to the weeks of research that had led to the hearing, trying to remember if there had been any details I'd overlooked or connections I hadn't fully explored. There was something, a property in Montana that showed up in his financial records, but it was buried so deep in shell company ownership that I couldn't prove the connection. "Tell me everything you remember." I pulled up my archived files and found the property records I'd flagged but never fully investigated. It's a ranch outside Billings, purchased through a company called Western Holdings LLC. The ownership chain goes through 3 different shell companies before connecting to Marcus's network, and the paperwork is designed to make it nearly impossible to trace. Director Walsh was already making notes on her tablet. "What made you notice it?" "The timing. The property was purchased 2 weeks after Marcus started working with Bradley, using money that matched one of the early diversions from Crimson Web funds. But the purchase was structured like a long-term investment, not a quick money laundering operation." I pulled up satellite imagery of the property, showing a large ranch house surrounded by dense forest and accessible only by a single mountain road. It's isolated, defensible, and has multiple escape routes through the national forest. If someone wanted to disappear or plan operations without surveillance, it would be perfect. Director Walsh stood up, her expression grim. "We're sending a team to Montana immediately. In the meantime, you're being moved to a safe house until we can neutralize this threat. What about my work? The Belgrade network investigation? We'll have to wait. Your safety is the priority right now. She headed toward the door, then turned back. Victoria, I want you to understand something. The work you've done over the past 2 years has saved lives and protected national security. But it's also made you a target for people who profit from the chaos you've been disrupting. This threat from Marcus is serious, but it's not the last one you'll face. She paused, her expression softening slightly. The question is whether you're prepared for that reality. Intelligence work isn't just about analyzing data from a secure office. Sometimes it means people want to hurt you because you're good at your job. I thought about the person I'd been 6 months ago, the one who'd believed she was a failure and a disappointment. That person would have been terrified by the idea of being targeted by dangerous people. But the person I'd become understood that some things were worth the risk. I'm prepared, I said. This is who I am now. Director Walsh nodded approvingly. Good. Because we're going to need you to help us find Marcus before he can implement whatever he's planning. You know his methods better than anyone, and you understand how he thinks. After she left, I began packing the essential files I'd need to continue working from the safe house. As I gathered the documents and drives that contained months of analysis, I thought about how strange it was that the skills I'd developed while believing I was failing had turned out to be exactly what my country needed. The irony wasn't lost on me that Marcus, in his attempt to use my work as cover for his crimes, had inadvertently made me one of the most effective intelligence analysts in the agency. His betrayal had been the catalyst for me discovering my true capabilities. Now, as I prepared to help hunt down the man who'd tried to destroy my family, I realized that this wasn't really about revenge. It was about finishing what we'd started at the hearing. Marcus represented more than just personal betrayal. He represented a corruption that threatened everything the intelligence community was supposed to protect. My secure phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. Safe house coordinates incoming. We'll continue the investigation from there. This isn't over. She was right. The hearing had been a victory, but it hadn't been an ending. It had been the beginning of understanding what I was truly capable of, and what I was willing to do to protect the people and principles I served. As I locked my office and headed toward the security escort that would take me to the safe house, I thought about something my father had said during one of our recent conversations. Intelligence work isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's about being willing to see connections that others miss, even when those connections are dangerous. I was finally ready to see everything clearly, no matter how dangerous the truth turned out to be. The safe house in Fredericksburg looked like every other colonial revival home in the Virginia suburbs. White picket fence, manicured lawn, and a minivan in the driveway that belonged to the Cover family who supposedly lived there. But behind the ordinary facade, the house was equipped with military-grade security systems and a communications center that rivaled anything at Langley. I'd been there for 3 days, working around the clock with Sarah and a team of analysts to track Marcus's movements and predict his next target. The Montana ranch had been empty when the tactical team arrived, but they'd found evidence that someone had been there recently, food in the refrigerator, clothes in the closet, and most importantly, a sophisticated communications setup that had been hastily abandoned. The technical analysis revealed that Marcus had been using the ranch as a coordination center for a network that extended far beyond what we'd uncovered during the original investigation. Financial records found in a hidden safe showed connections to intelligence services in 4 different countries, arms dealers in Eastern Europe, and terrorist financing networks across the Middle East. He wasn't just selling our intelligence to the highest bidder, Sarah said, spreading surveillance photos across the dining room table that had been converted into our command center. He was building a brokerage service for classified information, taking intelligence from multiple sources and selling it in packages to whoever needed it. I studied the photographs, recognizing some of the faces from intelligence briefings I'd attended over the past few months. These are all current assets, people who are still active in the field. We're active, Sarah corrected grimly. 3 of them have gone missing in the past week. 2 more have had their covers blown and had to be extracted. Marcus isn't just planning retaliation against us. He's systematically destroying the intelligence network that exposed him. The secure phone on the table buzzed with an incoming call from Director Walsh. When I answered, her voice carried the kind of tension that meant something major had happened. Victoria, we've had a breakthrough. NSA intercepted communications between Marcus and someone using the codename Architect. The conversation suggests they're planning something for tomorrow night, and your name was mentioned specifically. I put the call on speaker so Sarah could hear. What kind of operation? We're not sure yet, but the communications mentioned the Meridian Center and something called Operation Clean Slate. Does that mean anything to you? The Meridian Center was a conference facility in downtown Washington where the intelligence community held its annual awards ceremony. Tomorrow night was the event where my father was scheduled to receive the Distinguished Service Medal for his work on Crimson Web. I'd been planning to attend as his guest, one of the first times we'd appeared together publicly since the hearing. It's a trap, I said, the pieces falling into place. Marcus knows I'll be there. He's planning to use the ceremony as cover for whatever he's really planning. That was our assessment as well. The event has been canceled, and we're implementing enhanced security protocols for all potential targets. Sarah leaned forward toward the phone. Director Walsh, this is Sarah Martinez. I don't think canceling the ceremony is enough. If Marcus is working with this architect person, they'll just adapt their timeline. We need to draw them out and finish this. What are you suggesting? I looked at Sarah, understanding immediately what she was thinking. We use the ceremony as bait. Let them think their plan is working, then spring our own trap. Absolutely not. Director Walsh's voice was sharp. We're not using you as live bait for a revenge-motivated fugitive with access to international criminal networks. With respect, Director, that's exactly what we should do. Marcus's entire plan depends on predictability. He knows how the CIA operates, how we think, how we respond to threats. But he doesn't know that I've changed. He still thinks of me as the frightened dropout who stumbled into uncovering his operation. Sarah was nodding as I spoke. Victoria's right. Marcus is operating from outdated intelligence about who she is and what she's capable of. If we can convince him that she's still vulnerable, we can control where and when the confrontation happens. There was a long pause before Director Walsh responded. What exactly are you proposing? I was already working out the details in my head. We announce that the ceremony is back on, but with enhanced security. Make it look like we're taking precautions but still proceeding with the original plan. Marcus will see it as an opportunity to complete his mission while proving that he can outsmart our security measures. And then? Then we make sure we're ready for him. We know he's planning something called Operation Clean Slate. That suggests he wants to eliminate multiple targets at once, probably everyone involved in exposing his network. If we can identify all the targets and protect them while giving him a false sense of opportunity, we can end this. Sarah pulled out her laptop and began typing rapidly. I can reach out to my contacts in the private security sector. We'll need people who aren't part of the official intelligence community, operators who Marcus won't recognize or anticipate. Director Walsh's voice was skeptical. This is an enormous risk. If something goes wrong, we could lose multiple high-value personnel in a single operation. If we don't take the risk, Marcus will just keep picking us off one by one while building his intelligence brokerage network. This way, we control the battlefield and the timing. Another pause, then Director Walsh sighed. I'll need to clear this with the deputy director. In the meantime, start developing a detailed operational plan. And Victoria, I want multiple contingency plans for extracting you if things go sideways. After the call ended, Sarah and I spent the next 6 hours mapping out every detail of what we were calling Operation Revelation. The plan was complex but elegant, using Marcus's own psychology against him while leveraging resources he wouldn't expect us to have. The ceremony would proceed as scheduled, but with 3 layers of security that Marcus wouldn't be able to detect from external surveillance. The first layer would be obvious, designed to make him think he understood our defensive posture. The 4E. Second layer would be invisible, positioned to respond to his most likely attack vectors. The third layer would be psychological, using his emotional investment in revenge to make him predictable. My father arrived at the safe house late that evening, looking older and more tired than I'd seen him since the hearing. When Sarah briefed him on the plan, his expression went through several changes before settling on resigned determination. "You're using yourself as bait to protect me," he said quietly. "That's not how this is supposed to work. It's not about protecting you specifically, it's about stopping Marcus before he can do more damage to the intelligence community." I showed him the files we'd compiled on Marcus's network. "Look, at this. He's not just planning revenge. He's building something that could compromise American intelligence operations for decades." My father studied the documents, his analytical mind processing the implications. "The scope is much larger than we realized during the original investigation." Exactly. Marcus was never just a corrupt analyst selling secrets for money. He was building infrastructure for a new kind of intelligence warfare, one where classified information becomes a commodity traded on international markets. Sarah pulled up a map showing the geographic distribution of Marcus's network. "If we don't stop him now, he'll disappear into this network and emerge somewhere else with a new identity and even better protection. This is our one chance to end it definitively." My father looked at me for a long moment. "You've changed, not just since the hearing, but since you started working in intelligence analysis. You think like an operative now, not just an analyst." "Is that a problem?" "No. It's exactly what this situation requires." He stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the quiet suburban street. "I spent so many years trying to protect you from this world. I thought if I kept you at a distance, you'd be safe from the kind of danger that comes with intelligence work." He turned back to face me. "But you were never really at a distance, were you? You were always part of this world, even when neither of us realized it, and now you're better at it than I ever was." The next morning brought a flurry of activity as we implemented the operational plan. Director Walsh had gotten approval from the deputy director, but with strict conditions about oversight and extraction protocols. The ceremony would proceed with normal attendees, but every person in the building would be either a target under protection or a security asset in disguise. I spent 2 hours with a tactical team going over floor plans of the Meridian Center, identifying sightlines, escape routes, and defensive positions. The building was a security nightmare, with multiple entrances, glass walls, and balcony access that provided dozens of potential attack vectors. "The key is channeling his approach," the tactical team leader explained. "We want to make certain routes look vulnerable while actually having them under complete surveillance and control. If Marcus comes in the way we expect, we can neutralize him without endangering the civilians." Sarah was coordinating with her private security contacts to position additional assets around the building. "These are operators Marcus won't recognize, people who've worked in corporate security and private military contracting. They'll blend into the background while providing additional coverage for our priority targets." By afternoon, we'd received confirmation that Marcus had taken the bait. NSA intercepts showed communications between him and the architect, discussing final preparations for Operation Clean Slate. The timing matched the ceremony exactly, and the target list included everyone involved in exposing his original network. I was getting dressed for the ceremony when Sarah knocked on my door. She was holding a small device that looked like a compact, but was actually a tracking beacon and emergency communicator. "Wear this. If something goes wrong and you get separated from your security detail, Activate the beacon and we'll find you. I clipped it to my evening bag, then checked the small earpiece that would keep me in communication with the tactical team. How confident are you that this is going to work? Marcus is predictable when he's emotional, and revenge makes people very emotional. He'll come tonight because he can't resist the opportunity to prove he's smarter than all of us. Sarah paused. The question is whether he's bringing enough backup to make it a real fight. The Meridian Center looked exactly as it always did for the annual ceremony, with black cars dropping off intelligence officials in formal wear and subtle security presence that suggested importance without revealing specific details. I arrived with my father, both of us dressed for the occasion but wearing body armor under our formal clothes. Director Walsh met us at the entrance, her expression carefully neutral. To any observer, this would look like a normal evening where the intelligence community celebrated its achievements. Only a handful of people knew that we were actually implementing an elaborate trap for a fugitive spy. Everything's in position, she said quietly as we moved through the security checkpoint. Marcus is in the area. We have visual confirmation from 3 different surveillance teams. The main ballroom was filled with people I recognized from briefings and official functions, all of them unaware that they were part of an operation designed to capture one of their former colleagues. My father moved through the crowd with practiced ease, accepting congratulations and maintaining the facade of a normal award ceremony. I positioned myself near the bar where I had clear sightlines to most of the room and easy access to 2 different exits. The tactical team had identified this location as optimal for both visibility and protection, allowing me to serve as bait while maintaining defensive options. The ceremony began right on schedule, with Director Walsh delivering opening remarks about the importance of intelligence work in protecting national security. When she introduced my father as the recipient of the Distinguished Service Medal, the applause was genuine and sustained. As my father approached the podium to accept the award, I noticed movement in the balcony area that didn't match the normal pattern of the event. 2 figures in evening wear were positioning themselves with clear lines of sight to the stage, and their movements were too coordinated to be casual. I activated my earpiece. Overwatch, this is Asset 1. I have eyes on 2 potential hostiles in the north balcony. Confirmed Asset 1. We see them. Stand by for intercept. My father was beginning his acceptance speech when I noticed a 3rd figure moving along the eastern wall of the ballroom. This one I recognized immediately, despite the formal wear and different hairstyle. Marcus had gotten inside the building, and he was positioning himself for something much more dramatic than a simple shooting. Overwatch, Marcus is in the building, eastern wall moving toward the service entrance. We have him. Teams 2 and 3 are moving to intercept. That's when I realized the flaw in our plan. We'd been thinking about Marcus as a revenge-motivated fugitive, but he was still an intelligence professional. He'd anticipated our security measures and had developed a counter-strategy that used our own tactical deployment against us. The 2 figures on the balcony weren't the real threat. They were decoys, positioned to draw our attention and resources while Marcus implemented the real operation from an unexpected vector. I scanned the room again, looking for what we'd missed. The answer came when I noticed that several of the waitstaff were moving with military precision, and their positions formed a perimeter around the high-value targets in the room. Marcus hadn't infiltrated the ceremony as a guest. He'd infiltrated it as part of the service staff, bringing a team of operatives disguised as caterers and security personnel. Overwatch, abort intercept. The waitstaff are hostiles. Repeat, Marcus has infiltrated the service team. I was already moving toward my father when the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, bathing the ballroom in red, illumination that turned everything into a nightmare landscape of shadows and confusion. Someone in the crowd screamed, and I could hear the tactical team shouting commands through my earpiece. Marcus's voice cut through the chaos, amplified by the building's sound system. Ladies and gentlemen of the intelligence community, you're about to witness the consequences of betraying your own people. I pushed through the panicking crowd toward the stage where my father was still standing, his metal gleaming under the emergency lights. Two of the fake waitstaff were moving toward him from different directions, their movements coordinated and purposeful. "Dad, get down!" I shouted, but my voice was lost in the chaos. That's when Sarah appeared beside me, no longer dressed as a guest, but in tactical gear and carrying a weapon I didn't recognize. "The building's in lockdown. Marcus has control of the security systems and he's using them to trap everyone inside." She handed me a sidearm and pointed toward the stage. "We need to get to your father before Marcus does. The tactical team is dealing with the decoys, but they don't know about the infiltrated service staff." We fought our way through the crowd, using the chaos as cover while moving toward the stage. I could see Marcus now, no longer disguised as a waiter but wearing body armor and carrying military-grade weapons. He was approaching my father with the calm determination of someone completing a mission. "Harrison Chen," Marcus called out, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom. "You destroyed my career to protect your failure of a daughter. Now she gets to watch you die for it." My father turned to face Marcus, his expression calm despite the weapon pointed at his chest. "Marcus, this isn't about Victoria or me. This is about you choosing to betray everything we swore to protect." "Protect?" Marcus laughed, a sound without humor. "You created an elaborate fiction to make your dropout daughter feel important, and when I tried to expose it, you destroyed me. But tonight, everyone will see what Victoria Chen really is. A liability who got good people killed because Daddy couldn't accept that she was worthless." That's when I stepped into the open, my weapon trained on Marcus while Sarah covered my flank. "You're wrong about everything, Marcus, but especially about what I am." Marcus's expression shifted from confidence to surprise as he saw me approaching. "Victoria, right on schedule. I was hoping you'd try to play hero. I'm not playing anything. This ends here." "Does it? Look around." Marcus gestured with his free hand, and I realized that his operatives had positioned themselves throughout the ballroom, each one holding a weapon on a different intelligence official. "I have hostages from every major agency: CIA, NSA, FBI, even a few Pentagon officials. One wrong move and I can decapitate American intelligence in a single evening." Sarah's voice was steady in my earpiece. "Victoria, the tactical team is in position, but they need you to keep Marcus talking while they neutralize his operatives." I kept my weapon trained on Marcus while moving closer to the stage. "What's the end game here, Marcus? You kill everyone in this room, and then what? You disappear into your criminal network and spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder? The endgame is proving that the intelligence community is fundamentally corrupt, that people like your father value family loyalty over national security, and that people like you are elevated beyond your capabilities because of who you're related to." Marcus was speaking loudly enough for everyone in the room to hear, and I realized that this wasn't just about revenge. It was about destroying the credibility of everyone who had exposed his crimes. He wanted to create a narrative where his betrayal looked justified compared to our supposed corruption. "You want to talk about corruption?" I kept my voice level and professional. "Let's talk about the $2.3 million you stole from operational funds, or the intelligence you sold to hostile governments, or the assets who died, because you compromised their identities for money." "Money?" Marcus's voice rose. "This was never about money. This was about protecting American interests from people who would sacrifice operational security for personal feelings. Then why did you run when you were exposed? Why didn't you stand trial and prove your innocence?" Marcus's expression flickered, and I could see uncertainty creeping into his confidence. "Because the system was rigged. You and your father controlled the narrative, and no one was interested in the truth." That's when I realized what Marcus really wanted. Not just revenge, but validation. He needed to believe that his betrayal had been justified, that he'd been protecting something larger than himself. The money, the foreign contacts, the elaborate, Schemes were all ways of avoiding the truth that he'd simply chosen personal advancement over professional duty. The truth is that you were a good analyst who made bad choices, I said, lowering my weapon slightly. You could have had a distinguished career, but you wanted more than you'd earned. And when that didn't work out, you blamed everyone else. I blamed the people responsible, Marcus snapped. Your father created a program that valued personal loyalty over professional competence. You were promoted beyond your abilities because of nepotism, and when I tried to expose it, I was destroyed. You were destroyed because you were selling classified information to foreign governments. Everything else is just the story you tell yourself to avoid taking responsibility. The tactical team was moving now, using our conversation as cover, to position themselves around Marcus's operatives. Through my earpiece, I could hear Sarah coordinating their movements while tracking the progress of each neutralization. Marcus must have sensed the shifting dynamics in the room, because his grip tightened on his weapon and his expression hardened. Enough talking. It's time for everyone to see what happens when you betray your own people. He started to turn his weapon toward my father, but I was already moving. 2 years of physical training and tactical instruction had changed more than just my analytical capabilities. I was faster and more aggressive than Marcus expected, closing the distance between us before he could complete his motion. We hit the stage together, both of us fighting for control of his weapon while the tactical team engaged his operatives throughout the ballroom. The sound of gunfire echoed off the walls, mixing with shouts from the crowd and commands from the security teams. Marcus was stronger than I was, but he was also older and hadn't been maintaining the same level of physical conditioning. More importantly, he was fighting for a cause he didn't really believe in, while I was fighting to protect people I cared about. The weapon went off twice during our struggle, both shots going wide and hitting the ceiling. Then Sarah was there, using the butt of her rifle to strike Marcus in the head with enough force to stun him without causing permanent damage. As Marcus collapsed, the gunfire throughout the ballroom began to fade. The tactical team had successfully neutralized his operatives, and the building's security systems were being restored to normal operation. Emergency medical teams were already treating the few people who'd been injured in the chaos. I stood over Marcus's unconscious form, breathing hard and trying to process what had just happened. 6 months ago, I'd been a data entry clerk who thought she was a disappointment to her family. Tonight, I'd helped orchestrate and execute a complex intelligence operation that had neutralized a significant threat to national security. Director. Walsh approached the stage as Marcus was being secured by the tactical team. "Are you injured?" I shook my head, still catching my breath. "I'm fine. What about casualties?" 3 minor injuries, no fatalities. Marcus's operatives were using non-lethal weapons, probably planning to take hostages rather than kill everyone. Outright. She paused, studying my expression. "You did well tonight, Victoria. Better than well." My father appeared beside Director Walsh, his formal wear disheveled but his expression proud. "I've never seen anything like that. You didn't just react to the situation, you controlled it." I looked around the ballroom, where intelligence officials were beginning to recover from the chaos while security teams processed the captured operatives. It's not over yet. Marcus was working with someone called the Architect, and we still don't know who that is or what else they might be planning. Sarah joined our group, pulling off her tactical gear and looking as calm as if she'd just finished a routine training exercise. Actually, we might have a lead on that. During the operation, we intercepted communications from one of Marcus's operatives trying to report the failure to their handler. NSA is tracing the signal now. Director Walsh nodded approvingly. "We'll have a full debrief tomorrow, but for now I think we can all agree that Operation Revelation was a success." She turned to me specifically. "Victoria, I want to talk to you about your future with the agency. Tonight proved that you have capabilities beyond analytical work." I thought about the person I'd been when this all started, standing invisible at my father's funeral and believing I was a disappointment. That person felt like a stranger now, someone I'd outgrown without realizing it was happening. "I'm interested in hearing what you have in mind," I said. 2 weeks later, I was back in my office at Langley, but everything was different. My title was now Senior Operations Analyst, and my responsibilities had expanded to include field operations coordination and tactical planning. The Belgrade network I'd been tracking had been successfully dismantled, and the intelligence we'd gathered was helping other agencies disrupt similar operations around the world. Marcus was in federal prison awaiting trial, and his intelligence network was being systematically dismantled by a joint task force. The architect had turned out to be a former CIA officer named David Richardson, who'd been running a private intelligence company that specialized in selling classified information to the highest bidder. His arrest had led to the discovery of a much larger conspiracy involving corrupt officials in multiple agencies. My father and I had dinner together every Sunday now, something we'd never done when I was growing up. Our relationship had fundamentally changed, not because either of us was different, but because we finally understood who we'd always been to each other. He wasn't trying to protect me from the intelligence world anymore, and I wasn't trying to prove myself worthy of his approval. Sarah had been offered a permanent position with the CIA, but she'd chosen to remain independent while working as a contractor on special operations. She said she preferred the flexibility of not being tied to any single agency, but I suspected she also enjoyed the freedom to operate outside normal bureaucratic constraints. The intelligence community had learned important lessons from Marcus's betrayal about the need for better oversight and security protocols. New procedures were being implemented to prevent the kind of financial manipulation and information selling that had made his operation possible. But more than the procedural changes, there was a cultural shift happening in how the community thought about intelligence work. The old model of compartmentalized operations and rigid hierarchies was giving way to more flexible approaches that valued analytical insight and operational creativity. I was reviewing reports from a new financial tracking operation when my secure phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the encryption protocols indicated it was coming from a high-level government source. "Victoria Chen," I answered. "Ms. Chen, this is Deputy Director Stevens from the National Security Council. I have a proposition for you." I saved my work and gave him my full attention. "What kind of proposition?" "We're forming a new joint task force to investigate intelligence corruption at the international level. The work would involve both analytical research and field operations, and you'd be working with agencies from allied countries to identify and neutralize threats to shared intelligence operations." It was exactly the kind of challenge I'd been hoping for, an opportunity to use everything I'd learned about intelligence analysis while expanding into operational work on a global scale. When would this start? Immediately, if you're interested. The first assignment involves tracking a network that appears to be connected to Marcus Chen's operation, but operating in Europe and Asia rather than the United States. I thought about the person I'd been a year ago and the person I'd become since then. The scared, uncertain woman who'd believed she was a failure would never have considered accepting an assignment like this. But the intelligence officer I'd become understood that some work was too important to decline. "I'm interested," I said. 6 months later, I was sitting in a cafe in Prague, reading a newspaper while monitoring a suspected intelligence broker who thought he was meeting a potential client. My operational cover was as a freelance journalist researching financial crimes in Eastern Europe, and I'd been working the assignment for 3 weeks. The target, a former Russian intelligence officer named Petrov, had been selling classified information from multiple sources to criminal organizations throughout Europe. The operation to arrest him was scheduled for the following day, but today was about confirming his methods and identifying his contacts. My father had been right when he said that intelligence work was about seeing connections others missed. But he'd been wrong about one thing. The most important connections weren't always in the data. Sometimes they were in understanding people, their motivations and fears, and the stories they told themselves about their choices. Marcus had betrayed his country because he'd convinced himself that his personal advancement was more important than his professional duties. Petrov was selling intelligence because he believed that the end of the Cold War had made patriotism obsolete and that survival required adaptation to new economic realities. Both of them had created elaborate justifications for their betrayals. But underneath the rationalizations was the same basic failure. They'd stopped believing that their work served something larger than themselves. The earpiece crackled with Sarah's voice. She was positioned across the square, providing overwatch while I conducted the surveillance. Targets moving toward the meeting location. Are you ready for this? I folded my newspaper and stood up, blending into the crowd of tourists and locals moving through the busy square. I've been ready for this my whole life. I just didn't know it until now. As I followed Petrov toward what would be his final meeting as a free man, I thought about the conversation I'd had with my father. Before leaving for Prague, he'd told me that he was proud of who I'd become, not because I'd proven myself worthy of his approval, but because I'd discovered capabilities he'd never imagined I possessed. The intelligence community had given me a purpose I'd never expected and skills I'd never known I could develop. But more than that, it had given me the chance to protect something that mattered, to serve a cause larger than myself, and to use my abilities in ways that made a real difference in the world. Tomorrow, after Petrov was arrested and his network was dismantled, I'd move on to the next assignment. There would always be another Marcus, another Petrov, another threat to the security and stability that allowed people to live their lives without constant fear. But tonight, I was exactly where I belonged, doing exactly what I was meant to do. Not because anyone else had decided I was worthy of it, but because I'd finally understood who I'd always been capable of becoming. The person my father had called a dropout no longer existed. In her place was someone who'd learned that the most important victories weren't about proving other people wrong. They were about discovering the truth about yourself, even when that truth was more challenging and dangerous than anything you'd ever imagined. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.